All right. All right, I'll start letting folks in. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Just going to give people a little bit of time to join, and then we'll get started. Oh,
Yep. Todd Bates.
all right, we'll give folks just another minute, and then we'll get started. Also, we are recording. Just wanted to let everybody know that the recording is already in progress, so that we can make sure that people who couldn't be here can get all of the info we're going to share. So there is a recording going on. Sorry, just a second. Someone pointed out that I'm sharing the wrong slides. Just a minute. Okay. Okay, should we go ahead and get started? All right, welcome everybody to Virtual Award Night. This week we are going to do an overview of the budget with Geoffrey Cubbage from the Better Government Association. We're really very excited that he's here. So these are our community agreements. If you've been to a virtual award night before, you've seen these. And then we have the agenda down here. We're going to just spend a couple of minutes on the introductory stuff, and then you'll hear from Lenny, and then you'll hear from Geoffrey, and then we'll do a Q&A. And we'll do the Q&A just by, raising your hand and then asking your question out loud. You can also throw questions in the chat. But yeah, if anybody has any questions about the community agreements and agenda, feel free to put those in the chat as well. Otherwise, I'll just give you a second to read those. And then when she's ready, I will pass it over to Lenny.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ward Night. We appreciate you being here. And thank you for being here now in real time and also for sharing the recording later on when it's available. 48th Ward is always available to you on Bryn Mawr at 1129 West Bryn Mawr, and also by phone and email. And I just wanted to extend also a welcome to our guest, Geoffrey Cubbage, who's here from the Better Government Association. And we want to leave a lot of time for questions if you have them or comments, and feel free to use the chat. I just wanted to give you a couple updates about what happened in City Hall today. We had a meeting and there were two resolutions. One of them, because it is the 70th anniversary of our Armistice Day, November 11th. We honored veterans today. And so I do want to put it out there that the 48th Ward is committed to making sure that all of our residents are getting all the resources they need, especially our veterans who've made the ultimate sacrifice to help us live in the community that we have today, where we can access public services and make sure that we are all safe. We also know that there are too many veterans that have been felt left behind, who have they don't have access to resources. They are unfortunately living on our streets, and as well as those who are also serving us in public office right now, including three of my colleagues, including Alderman Bill Conway, who also is one of our only active reservists in the city council at this time. So I just wanted to thank all of the veterans out there for your service to our world that we live in today. And please let us know if there's anything that we can do for you. We are here for you. The other resolution that we had today was to observe National American Heritage Month. And the city acknowledges that Chicago is located on the traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe, or the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi nations. And, we have so much to be blessed with in terms of what we have in the 48th Ward. And we also have to reckon with our history. So we do recognize that Native American history is not talked about enough. I recognize that there is so much to do in terms of making sure that we are good stewards of our land. And so I thank you all for working with me so that we can ensure that our Native Americans are recognized and supported and seen, because we do have Native Americans who live among us, and we want to make sure that they are taken care of. So thank you all of you for being here. I also wanted to mention that City Council is moving forward with so many things that we talked about on the campaign trail, especially around housing, affordability, also around healthcare, which should include mental health supports, and also how public safety happens when we care for the whole of our community. So we are going to continue to talk about ordinances such as Bring Chicago Home, to make sure that it is on the ballot in the next election as a referendum, to make sure that treatment, not trauma, includes opening up closed mental health facilities, and also passing the peace book so that we have peace counselors throughout the Chicagoland area that are led by young people, to ensure that everyone has opportunities for jobs, also for healthcare, and especially mental health supports. And we look forward to making that an ordinance and having it led by young people. So I know that others wanted other updates in City Council, and please continue to call our office to let us know what you want to get out of these virtual night meetings. Somebody asked earlier if we're ever going to do something in a hybrid format, and that could be possible in the future, but please let us know, give us feedback. With every meeting that we have, we learn so much from you. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Audrey to continue on with the meeting.
Thank you very much, Lenny. I'm just going to throw those community agreements in the chat for people who are just joining. But without further ado, Geoffrey, take it away so we can all hear about the budget.
Sure thing. Thanks very much. And good evening, 48th Ward. My name is Geoffrey Cubbage. I'm with the Better Government Association, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit government watchdog here in Chicago. It was founded in 1923 by a group of concerned citizens who wanted to increase accountability and decrease corruption in Cook County and Chicago government. Some would argue we're still working on it 100 years later, but you know, a little bit of progress every year, we like to think. One of the functions we have is as a policy and budget analysis organization. We do fairly deep dives into the city budget every year. And this was our second year of doing a series of departmental snapshots every day. As departmental hearings were going on in city council, we tried to provide the public and the older persons with breakdowns of what was in this year's budget versus what was in last year's budget, what some of those historical trends have looked like over the last decade or more of spending, just to put a little more context on what's being pitched this year. And so when the 48th Ward reached out and said, hey, can you just break the budget down real quick? We said, sure, you know, we've already got most of those numbers in one place, so let's just put it into a little slide deck and try and make it digestible. It is going to be a little bit of a 35,000 foot view. You know, it's a large budget. It has a lot of stuff in it, but I'm going to try and keep the presentation fairly short so that you can ask questions at the end. And if some of those are more specific than I've got an immediate answer for, there's usually an answer somewhere in the budget book and the budget spreadsheets that I can find for you. So we can swap contact info at the end, and folks can always follow up with us at the Better Government Association as well. So let me do the screen share and make sure it looks okay. You all holler at me if there are any issues with this. Hang on real quick. There we go. That look all right? Getting the thumbs up? Perfect. Okay. Well, you've already had the introduction, you know who I am. So let's just real quick run through what you're going to get out of this one. We're going to talk about the budget and an overview. We're going to talk about finance general, which is appropriations that are non-departmental. We're going to talk about what each of the departments is getting. We're going to talk about positions and FTEs. That's full-time equivalents. So that's just people who are hired on an hourly or monthly basis. The Alderwoman and her staff asked me to break out a little bit more on the public safety budgets, just to take a slightly deeper dive there, because it is one of the biggest budget categories we have. It's where a lot of our public spend goes to. So we'll do a little deeper dive there. We'll talk about the timeline, what's left in the budget process. And then at the end, I've got a couple of links, places you can get more information, where you can do some deeper digging on your own, and some other folks who might be able to help you out with that as well. So super quick into our budget overview. I do want to do a little context setting. The budget is a really useful document in some ways, and it is a really frustrating document in other ways. It is going to give you a set of maximums is really the best way to think about it. It will tell you how much each department and the city as a whole get to spend on specific categories. It will tell you how many people maximum the city can hire in specific titles. And it will tell you how much money the city is expecting to get from different revenue streams in the coming year. And that last one has to equal the first two. Your appropriations have to balance with your revenues and your transfers, which include surplus from the previous years and a couple other things. But at the end of the day, by law, excuse me, what the mayor presents and what city council approves, the columns have to add up. You have to have revenues equal to your appropriations, and vice versa. What's not going to be in there, and this is where it can sometimes get frustrating, are things like any sort of operational details. One of the questions, or a type of question that we get a lot at Better Government Association is, you know, how much is budgeted for this specific thing? How many officers are going to be in my police district? How much is going toward, you know, this specific housing supplement? Those aren't necessarily in there. A lot of that gets set at the operational level. Departments will have a big pool of money to do lots of different things with, and contracting is a really good example. We'll get questions like, you know, can the city council vote down the Garda World contract? Can the city council vote down the ShotSpotter contract? Things like that. Those don't come to city council as individual items to be voted on. Each department has a contracting budget. The city council votes on how many hundreds or thousands or millions of dollars they're going to give to each department to spend on contracts. It is then up to that department to pick and choose its contracts. And typically the city council doesn't have to approve them. There are some exceptions. There's some real estate things there where the city council is signing off on them individually. But by and large, when you get down to that level of operational detail, it's not in the budget. Another thing the budget's not going to give you is the actual real number of people working in these titles or these positions that we're budgeting for. The Office of Budget and Management and the Department of Human Resources do provide the older people with a list of like where we're currently at with vacancies at the start of budget hearings, but that's just a snapshot in time. That's really just saying, here's how many positions we expected to hire this year. Here's how many we actually had filled as of the first day of budget hearings, whatever that was, October 6th or 7th this year. It's not real time. There is no real time comparison of how many positions we have budgeted for versus how many are actually filled. That's just not data that exists. You can FOIA it, Freedom of Information Act, you can file a request and get a snapshot in time, but that's really all you can ever do with the current data sets that we're getting. And similar to that, another shortcoming of Chicago's budgets in particular is it does not give what are called actuals. It doesn't provide how much did we actually spend in previous years in all of these categories. Other cities do that. Other levels of government do that. It's usually a year or more. It's usually a year or more out of date. Government bills don't always come due. Don't always start on January 1st and end December 31st. So you usually have to go back a year previous. But many cities do publish, hey, this is what we're asking for in 2024. This is what we budgeted in 2023. This is what we actually spent once all the bills got paid in 2022. That's a really useful piece of data for trying to figure out how much you actually need to budget going forward. It's not one that the city currently gives the public. So that's a shortcoming of the budget that we have to work around as best we can. Another thing that's not going to be in there, sister agencies. So a lot of Chicago's big public services are separate taxing bodies. They have their own taxing authority. They get their own revenue streams. They have their own governing boards. They have their own rules laid out in state law. City council's budget doesn't cover those. So things like Chicago Housing Authority, Chicago Public Schools, the Parks District, the CTA, those aren't going to be in the municipal budget that the older people are voting on. Those are overseen by their own boards who have public meetings you can go to, who have public budgets you can look at, but they're not going to be in this document. And the last one I put on there, just because it is something people do ask as well, your property tax rate, what you're actually paying on your property or how that gets calculated, not going to be in the city budget. The city will set its total levy. The city will say, this is how many millions or billions of dollars we need to get from property taxes this year. This is what we are taxing the entire city's properties as a whole. The Cook County Assessor's Office will then break down what each individual parcel is assessed at, how that burden gets shared out to each individual taxpayer, all of that. So it's a multi-step process. And the only part of it that City Council actually oversees is the levy, how many millions or billions of dollars you're asking for in taxing revenue. So with that understanding, with those limitations laid out, here's what we know from the budget. This is your snapshot of the city budget as a whole, as it's been proposed by the mayor. The mayor's team writes a budget proposal. They send it to city council. City council gets to vote on whether they want to approve it or not. This is the proposal that was put forward this October. That little chart up at the top just sort of gives it to you in whole numbers, and then the bullets below will break it down for you a little bit. It is an $18.2 billion spending budget. That is how much we are total looking to spend is $18.2 billion, which is up about 1.3% from last year. It's up about $238 million from last year. The total balance of the budget comes in at 16.6 million, which is just, it's that 16.6 billion. I'm sorry, that should be billion with a B. It's that 18.2 billion minus 1.4 billion, most of which is transfers. A lot of that is surplus from the previous year. There are also some intergovernmental transfers of funds, but it's primarily surplus from the previous year that's balancing you down to 16.6. And then on the headcount side, the number of full-time positions and full-time equivalents, monthly or hourly, is up about 300 people, which is, it's less than 1% growth, which in a city the size of Chicago is fairly negligible, but a small bump in how many people we're budgeting to hire this coming year. Historical comparison for you there, that just gives you a general idea of how the budget has grown over the last decade or so, last 12 years. We broke it out into finance general appropriations and departmental. We're going to talk about that a little in the next couple slides. Departmental appropriations are exactly what they sound like. That's money that's budgeted for Chicago Police Department, Chicago Department of Public Health, Chicago Department of Transportation, all of them. Finance general is non-departmental, sort of citywide pools of money that get spent on big enterprise expenses. You see that big spike towards the end of the graph. A lot of that is federal money. That's pandemic relief is what happened in 2022 and onwards. The American Rescue Plan came through from Congress, and you can see it mostly went into departmental budgets. Departmental budgets spiked because they were getting many billions of dollars to spend on pandemic relief funds. And we are still spending that. 2026 is when all the money has to be gone by. So the next budget or two will still have some of those as we spend it down. I broke these appropriations out because I do think it's important to talk about what citywide spend is versus what's departmental. And these are your big categories. When you talk about citywide expense pools, things that we pay finance general dollars on, the far and away the biggest one is going to be our employee annuity and benefit. That's the pensions. Those are the pension payments to people who are receiving city pensions. Far and away the biggest. It's grown over the years, and that's because the state law changed. We had to start making, first it was called the ramp. We made slowly increasing payments into it, and now we are on actuarially calculated pensions. We have to put in an amount that is based on how many people are receiving pensions, how long they're expected to live, how many people are retiring every year, and a whole bunch of other factors. So that's going to keep going up. That's something that I think everyone in the city and the state is pretty painfully aware of at this point. So there are a lot of things being talked about at the state level to help with that. There's not a lot the city can do directly to help with it. Although one thing that Lightfoot did in her previous year and that this administration continued in this year was paying more than the minimum. You know, just like with any other debt, if you pay down the principal, it helps. So the city is making payments above and beyond that statutorily required minimum. They did that last year, and they have that in this year's budget as well. Other than that, you'll see the next couple of items down. Those are going to be bonds, interest on bonds, and payment of bonds. City has done many rounds of bonds over the years. They mostly pay for infrastructure, things like your water, your sewer, your roads are a big one right now. You're getting a lot of CDOT construction that's bond funded. And then the next couple below that we're back into pensions and other benefits here into your medical claims and things like that. So one of the things Chicago does is it pools all those together. Don't break it out by department. So you can see, oh, we're spending a lot on pensions. You can see, oh, we're spending a lot on medical. You don't see how much is Chicago Fire Department spending on pensions versus how much is Chicago Public Library spending on pension. Our budget doesn't do that. Cook County's does. Each operating unit within Cook County breaks out the pension cost. It's just a better actuarial practice. It makes it easier on people like us who try to analyze budgets. So that's something that we've encouraged the Office of Budget Management to change, and hopefully they will one of these years. But for right now, it's treated as a lump sum. Just something we wrote about earlier in the year, so I always like to highlight it for people. This non-departmental category does seem to keep getting bigger. There are more expense categories that keep getting considered non-departmental. It's something worth keeping an eye on, what gets lumped under finance general versus what gets put under departments, because it can sometimes disguise what a department really costs, right? Like there are expenses that have gone into finance general in recent years that are really only relevant to one department. There'll be things for consent decree, which is a Chicago Police Department expense. There'll be things for fire facilities maintenance, which is a Chicago Fire Department expense. When they go under finance general instead, they don't show up in that department's budget. So it sort of skews what the actual real cost per service from each of those departments is. So something to keep an eye on, something that some of the alders asked some good questions about during the budget hearings, which was great to see. So we just throw that graph in there to make people aware that this has sort of been an increasing trend over time of shuffling more things in this finance general part of the budget. And you can see that on this chart too. The red line there is how much of a percent of the overall city budget finance general category is. And you can see it was going up pretty much steadily until that influx of federal funds, the ARP funds that came in, those went into departmental budgets. So you had departments that previously had budgets in the hundreds of millions or the tens of millions that are suddenly in the billions, you know, billion with a B. So a huge spike in departmental spending means finance general takes up less of the total pie. So that dropped, but it's climbing back up. You can see, you know, in 2023 and then going into 2024, that share of the budget is crawling upwards again. But mostly we want to talk about the departments that provide the services, right? The folks who are doing boots on the ground work for you. What are they spending money on? And the answer here is, the first biggest answer is always salaries and wages, personnel. You know, the people who are actually doing the work, always going to be the biggest expense category. That's pretty typical of any large organization. It's certainly typical in city government. That next category down, though, professional and technical services, that's outside contracting. It's a catch-all category. It covers a huge range of services, you know, everything from window washers to, you know, people who do preschool childcare to some of the clinical services that we've outsourced over the years. And it is a large chunk of what departments spend money on. We have a number of departments that spend more on professional and technical services or other pass-through categories like delegate agencies than they do on their staff. So that's just a function of the city hiring people to work on a one-time basis rather than hiring permanent staff who are kept on board, to stay on as city employees full-time. The next one down, construction of buildings and structures, almost entirely grant or bond funded. That's not really coming out of like year-over-year tax dollars. That's that long-term infrastructure spending. And then the next one down, delegate agencies, is another of those pass-through. It's similar to contracting. It's where there are agencies who have become official city service providers, even though they're not part of the city. So that's things like the homeless shelters that are operated by nonprofits, a lot of our mental health services and our physical health services that are provided by a sort of a constellation of nonprofit providers. A number of them are official city providers for one service or another, but it's not city employees doing the work, it's employees of another party, and that's what delegate agencies is. All of these categories do get broken down by department on our webpage. So if you want to see more of this in more detail, you can always go to bettergov.org. And obviously I'll take questions afterward and can break some of it down for you too. But this is the citywide picture you're looking at. This is when you combine all the departments. These are the biggest categories that they're spending money on. And here's a chart that's hard to see all the details of, but this is all of the city departments and how big of a share of the pie they get. These are the departmental appropriations in the 2024 proposed budget. You can see the Chicago Police Department on the left there. It bumps up to the $2 billion mark. The next biggest is Department of Transportation, 1.5 billion, and it goes down pretty steeply from there. I like this chart, even though you can't always read all the names at the bottom, because it gives you a real sense of how really just 6 or 7 departments make up a big chunk of the city budget, a huge chunk of our operational spending. And I broke it down into this pie chart because it's a little easier to see. That's just the biggest ones. If you start at the 12 o'clock, the noon position, and go clockwise, you got CPD is about 20% of the budget. CDOT is about 15. That's the Department of Transportation. Department of Aviation is about 14. CDPH and DFSS, that's the Department of Public Health and the Department of Family and Support Services, which were both big ARP fund recipients. So they have unusually large budgets right now because of all those federal dollars. And then the fire department, AIS 2FM, which is sort of our buildings and vehicles department. And then all the rest of the departments, a quarter of the budget or so, they get less than 5% of the operational budget. They all make very, very, very small amounts compared to these. One thing I do think is worth highlighting on this is CPD and CFD and AIS 2FM, those are mostly drawing out of the corporate fund. That's like the year over year, mostly tax funded revenue. They're drawing on what you would think of as the city's main budget. CDOT and the Department of Aviation are basically self-funding. They have their own taxes or their own other income streams. For the airport, it's airport fees, concessions, federal funds, things like that. For CDOT, it's the vehicle tax, it's grants, it's federal and state money, things like that. So those aren't really fungible with other departments. Like you couldn't cut $100 million out of CDOT's budget and put it towards something else, because that's mostly coming from grants that are for infrastructure. They can't really be spent on policing or on schools or whatever else you want. So it's worth, when you look at how the departments break down, keeping in mind some of them, a cut to one department can be put somewhere else. Other departments, not so much. And CDOT and Department of Aviation, they really don't have a lot of flexibility at all. It's all coming from dedicated revenue streams. So that money basically has to stay with them. And their operations tend to get bigger or smaller depending on how those revenue streams are doing. Right now, the airports are making a lot of good revenue on their own, and they're also receiving federal pandemic funds still. So aviation's budget is up this year. Just real quick to see some of the change from the previous year. These are sort of your biggest and your biggest cuts and your biggest boosts in terms of raw dollars, in terms of the net change. You can see the green ones are the ones whose budget went up. The red ones are the ones whose budgets went down. And we did it in order of size. So this is your top 5 in either direction. Aviation and transportation, both grant funded, both had a ton of money from other levels of government coming in. So they went up a lot. Chicago Police Department, that's not grant funds, that's corporate funds, but that is going up as well. Streets of Sand and Water Management to a lesser degree. On the flip side of the ledger, the ones that saw the biggest, you can call them cuts, were departments that were receiving federal funds. They were receiving ARP money, and this year they received less of it. Office of Budget and Management, they're the ones who actually prepare the budget, and they oversaw a lot of the federal relief programs. It's not like Office of Budget and Management staff was necessarily out there like doing pandemic relief on the ground, but they oversaw the whole budget and it got put under their departmental budget. So now that those federal funds are winding down, they just have a smaller departmental budget. Same is true to some extent with Chicago Department of Public Health and Family and Sports Services. Those are service providers. They're doing a lot of the boots on the ground work, or they're contracting it out. But again, they're federal money. They're spending less of it this year, so their department budget went down. One thing that is worth highlighting, that AIS 2FM there, that used to be the Department of Assets, Information, and Services, which was made when Lori Lightfoot combined the Department of Information and Technology and the Department of Fleet and Facility Management. In his first budget, Brandon Johnson broke those two back apart. We're going back to having one department that does buildings and vehicles and a separate standalone department that does IT, software and hardware and everything to do with tech, basically. So it looks like it got a huge budget cut, but that budget cut basically went to create a new IT department that has its own budget and is operating as its own line item in the budget. So that's why AIS 2FM made that piece of the list. Going to positions and FTEs next. So that was all appropriations we were talking about. That was dollars. That's how many dollars are we budgeting for each of these departments? What is the maximum they can go over? Looking at FTEs, how many people they can hire. You can see again, Chicago Police Department, far and away the biggest. It's the biggest city department by a long shot. You know, almost 15,000 employees. About 11,000 of those are rank and file fraternal order police officers. So that is by far and away the biggest pool of employees that we have in the city of Chicago. Chicago Fire Department, much smaller, but still the second largest, and it all goes down quite a ways from there. We did the pie chart for this too, just so you can see. Chicago Police Department is a little under 40% of the city's total workforce, total budgeted workforce. The next largest is the fire department with about 15%. And it all goes down from there, with most of the departments making up less than 5% of the city's workforce. Same thing we did on appropriations here, just breaking down the changes. Obviously, Department of Technology and Innovation looks like it got the biggest boost because there was no Department of Technology and Innovation last year. So about 200 employees working there, many of whom were previously under Fleet and Facility Management. You can see Fleet and Facility Management went down about 230. Technology and Innovation went up about 205. So you eliminated 25-ish positions in the process of splitting those two departments apart. Everything else, smaller growth, some decent numbers in the growth section, very few headcount reductions. Almost all departments stayed at the same budgeted headcount or grew. The Office of the Mayor was the biggest cut with 4 less positions than it had the year before. Everything else down 1, you know, and really only a few departments even saw that. So not a lot of headcount cuts in the city's budget. Real quick, I'll take you through this one fairly fast, but like I said, the Alderwoman staff suggested that a closer look at the public safety budget would be helpful just because it is such a big pool of the city's workforce and the city's appropriation dollars. So those are your public safety departments. That's the Chicago Police Department in blue, Chicago Fire Department is in red, OEMC, that's the Office of Emergency Management and Communications. They run the city's 911 and 311 call centers. They do traffic management. They have some other functions, but it's primarily those call centers are their big responsibility. And then in Lightfoot's administration, we got a new department, the Office of Public Safety Administration, OPSA. That was created to basically centralize admin work for all of these departments. They were going to take over timesheets, HR, things like that. I like this chart with the bars because it does give you a pretty good idea of these being relatively stable over the years before OPSA and after. You know, CPD and CFD have stayed relatively the same amount of our public safety administration appropriations since 2011 and onwards. OPSA coming on the scene didn't really change it all that much. You can see from the year before it was founded to the current year's budget, almost no change at all in CPD's budget. No change at all, less than 0.1% change in fire department. OEMC has seen a reduction. That's not all because of things getting shuffled off to OPSA though. Also in Lightfoot's budget, OEMC used to be responsible for the crossing guards. We had taken the crossing guards over from the public schools several years before, and Lightfoot handed that back over. The crossing guards went back onto the public schools budget rather than the city's budget. So that reduced expense and headcount on OEMC's side of things. Police department, the largest of those, just to recap, obviously the largest of the budget. It's about 20% of our appropriations and 40% of our workforce. It is up this year. They went up almost 3%, which is more than the citywide budget went over. Citywide budget went up about 1.3%. CPD went up 2.9%. It's a total increase of about 55.6 million, which, you know, the whole year, the entire budget going up is only a little over 200 million or so. So you're spending almost a quarter of that budget effectively on the increase in one department. So I think that one's always worth breaking out. And here are some of the biggest changes that went toward. And that first one at the top, professional and technical services, you'll remember that's the outside contracting. That's not going toward headcount. That's not going toward direct city services. That's paying third-party vendors. And that went up a lot, almost an 80% increase, works out to about a 60 million increase, which is a substantial chunk of money. Some of that we know is going to go toward the presidential convention. The nominating convention is going to have outside security, outside expenses, things like that. And the city does get some money from the feds for that. So that's part of why that saw such a big leap, but it is still a significant one. And then the others, salaries and wages and comp time, those are both personnel related. That's salary, and then comp time is, it can be a number of things, but it's basically if you have to work extra days, you can take other days off, or you can get paid out for those days off. Down on the bottom, some of those categories that went down, we're not putting as much toward matching grants, which, you know, that fluctuates a fair amount year to year, depending on what's available, like what matching grants are even out there to put money toward. The other two were both touched on by the FOP contract, which City Council modified back in 2021 was the year they voted on it. So 2022 was the first budget it showed up. There were some retroactive increases to a number of benefits. So those went up a lot for a year and then a little bit the year after, and have since been tapering off as the city pays the retroactive benefits that it agreed it would do, going all the way back to 2017. This one I threw up because the head count's not changing. There's one less position, which is statistically negligible in a department the size of CPD, but those positions are getting shuffled around a fair amount. Which titles we're filling and where they're working within the department is changing a lot as the mayor shifts how we do some of our public safety responsibilities in the city. So Chicago Police Department as a division, that's sort of the main office staff. That's the central, a lot of those are non-uniform positions. A lot of those are admin and other roles. It's the people who are running the department rather than sort of what you think of as like cops on the beat. That's patrol services, which you can see at the bottom, reduced positions. We also have more people in crime control strategies, which is sort of the strategic office, constitutional policing and reform, which is involved with making sure we're complying with the consent decree. It's working on neighborhood policing strategies, things like that. And Bureau of Detectives, we know the mayor has put a lot of emphasis on getting people promoted to detective and increasing the city's force there. So you see a lot of that there. A lot of the shifts in titles are also making room for promotions. If you look at just the titles, you could see, oh, it looks like we're going to lose a ton of patrol officers. What's going on there? A lot of it is just opening up opportunities for those people to be promoted. There's room for more training officers. There's room for more sergeants, lieutenants, commanders, and some director positions as well, which is, you know, top admin, top brass. So the head count not changing, even though patrol officers going down, a lot of that is because they are assuming a large number of those patrol officers are going to seek promotion, are going to seek advancement within the department. So real quick, how it all's going down. We just had budget hearings. This was the memo that went out before them. So you can see we're most of the way down it already. We're at 11-1, council meeting, supplemental ordinance introduction. That just happened today. A lot of other things happened today too, but some sort of, for lack of a better word, bureaucratic functionary ordinances got introduced today saying we're going to appropriate property taxes. This is what the levy will be, things like that. So that all got introduced today. And we had our budget hearings where each department got up and spoke about their budget and answered questions. And the plan is for about 2 weeks of deliberation and then a vote in the middle of November, which is a little more deliberation than we've actually seen in past years. I did this chart for a piece the BGA put up a month or two ago. This is how much time roughly the city spends deliberating the budgets each year, from the introduction of the budget, from when the mayor stands up and says, here's my budget, and the data becomes available, to the day that it's scheduled to be voted on. And we, right now, 2024, we're that top bar. You can see that yellow chunk at the end, or orange chunk at the end, is a little longer than it's been historically. Historically, it's been anywhere from like 3 or 4 days to a week before the budget gets voted on. So the mayor's anticipating some more robust negotiations, which is good. I think, you know, a little deliberation on a 18-point-something billion budget is a nice thing to see. So that's what's going to be keeping your older person busy for the next 2 weeks, among many other things. And if anybody wants to dig into this stuff a little deeper, these are some really useful resources. The first one there, data.cityofchicago.org, that's where the actual spreadsheets live. That is where you can get what I used to do this analysis, which is the appropriations data, the positions data. And this year they actually put out a revenue data set too, which is new. That's the first time they've done it. It is only the local revenues. It doesn't include grants. So it's a little more limited in its use. You can't conjoin it to the other two data sets because the appropriations will add up to more than the revenues. So some work to be done there. But those appropriations and positions data sets, that's going to give you each line item for each department, saying how much they're going to get, how much is budgeted for every appropriation, and it's going to show you every title in the city of Chicago and how many positions each department has within it. The next link, which is a little long, I know, but if you just Google OBM Chicago or Budget Department Chicago, it will take you to that. That's the Office of Budget and Management. That's where you can get the PDFs, which do have more detail than the spreadsheets. They'll have some text explanations. They'll have bigger charts and things like that. So the budget book that you'll see the alders with at hearings when, you know, the staff says, or, you know, what page is that on? And the alders give them a number back. That's where that budget book lives. The next one down there, the Tri-City Clerk ELMS, that used to be Legistar. If anyone used Legistar back in the day, that's how City Council tracks legislation. So anything that's been introduced, anything that's been assigned to a committee, anything that's been voted on, it's in there. You can search for it by date, by bill number, by sponsor. You can do keyword searches. It can be a little tricky to navigate, but it is all in there if you're willing to be patient and try a couple different keyword searches usually. And then finally, bettergov.org. I do encourage folks who thought this was interesting, but want to see a little more of a breakdown on each of the departments. Go check out those snapshots. We broke down every single department, what positions increased, what positions decreased, what appropriations increased, what appropriations decreased, some historical context, some bullet points of what we thought were the most interesting changes. That's all there. And obviously we've been writing about government for many, many years. So there's lots of other things there that I think are of interest too. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I want to get into Q&A. My disclaimer for Q&A, I may not have super specific answers. If you're asking about one particular line item, I will probably have to go to my spreadsheet to find that. I will not be able to rattle it off the top of my head, but I'm very happy to track it down for you. So, you know, we just need to make sure we swap contact info if you're asking something that I have to get back to you through the chair as the alder people ask during the budget hearings. So I will close out the slide deck and turn it over to the 48th Ward staff to run the Q&A. There we go.
Thanks, Geoffrey. I think that's me. We did have a question in the chat that says on one of the first slides, it said new arrival services. What is that?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. And that is a new category. That's new this year. It is, as it sounds like, it is funds that are intended to assist the city with new arrivals, which means people who are migrating to the city for the first time, whether that's being bussed in, as many, many people have been recently, or migrating on their own. It's a pretty broad category, which the BGA gets a little antsy about. We like it when things are a little more clearly defined. So we don't know how much of that necessarily is going to go toward contracting, how much of it will end up paying for employees or, you know, supplies, materials. It's a broad category. That's not unusual for the first time an expense category comes into existence. The city has never budgeted specifically for new arrivals before. We've provided services. There have been DFSS, Department of Public Health, city clerk programs that are intended to help Chicagoans in a number of needs, including new arrivals. But this is the first time they've set aside money for it specifically. So what we're hoping to see is some operational clarity as that money gets handed out to individual departments. I think City Council has been doing a good job asking where it's going to go. I hope they continue to ask for that. The relevant committee does hold monthly hearings, which is very helpful. That's the, I'm going to get it wrong, but Committee on Immigration and Refugee Rights, I believe is the name. Alderman Vasquez is the chair of that committee. And they've been holding monthly hearings regardless of whether there's actual legislation that needs to be passed or not. They're just doing that to be informative, to have the staff from the mayor's department that works on new arrivals issues be there in front of City Council to answer questions every month. So highly, highly encourage people who are interested in where that money is going to show up for those, to do public comment for those, to ask their alder to show up for that if they're not a committee member.
Thanks so much. And there's one in the Q&A that says for Todd, did the city establish a Department of the Environment to build sustainability strategies and combat impact of climate change? What level of funding was allocated? If not, where is the money allocated to do work in this important area?
So yeah, short answer is yes, the city does have a Department of Environment again. And some history for folks who weren't around back then. We had one under Daley, and it was an enforcement agency. It ticketed polluters, did things like that. It did licensing inspections for buildings, various code-related enforcement things. Emmanuel got rid of that, rolled those functions into the Department of Public Health. That's where it lived all through Rahm Emanuel's time and Lori Lightfoot's term. Lightfoot in her very last budget sort of kickstarted. It was within the mayor's office budget, and it was called something like the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice or something like that. Brandon Johnson sort of took those funds and added to them and said, we're going to do it as a standalone department. It is going to stand up. I will have to grab our snapshot of that department to find the exact budget dollar and positions they got. It is relatively small. It is not a large staff. I think it's 10 or 15 people, maybe 20. And they do not yet have that regulatory role that they did under Emmanuel. Right now, they're essentially a planning and strategy department. That may change in future years with future budgets and changes to city ordinance. But as of right now, when you think of like smokestack demolitions, right? When you think of like holding polluters accountable, when you think of testing soil, that stuff still currently lives with the Department of Public Health.
Thanks for that. If anyone else has a question, you can raise your hand in Zoom, or you could type it in or use the Q&A. I did put the URLs that were on your final slide in the chat for anyone who wants to look further.
Thank you. Yeah, and that data sheet will have the answer to that question as well. You can just filter by Department of Environment, and it'll show you all the appropriations made for that particular department.
Great. Any other questions for Geoffrey? I think. Oh, Lenny's got her hand up. Let's hear from Lenny. Lenny Manaa-Hoppenworth, let's hear from you.
Thank you. Geoffrey, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it very, very much. And all the work that you do at Better Government Association. I wanted to ask you, in terms of the budget, how it was presented this year versus last year, how do you think that we are doing a good job of presenting it in a way that is accessible for just regular people to join? I also will say to us generally, all of our hearings are accessible. You can come to City Hall and sit in the gallery and or sign up for public speaking time. And you can also do that online. But generally, Geoffrey, how do you think that we are doing as a city engaging just the general public about our budget?
That's a very loaded question. It's hard, right? I realize it is not always the easiest thing to get people excited about a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet in the first place. I think the city does some things very well. The release of the data at the same time that the mayor presents the budget is really helpful, that you do get every appropriation that's being made and every position that's being filled or being budgeted rather, that all of those become live in a data set that you can put into Excel or you can put into various data management programs. That's really helpful, and not every city does it, right? There are a lot of cities that just put out a PDF. So anyone who wants to do detailed analysis has to spend time converting that from text to data and going from there. So we appreciate that. Some of the things I highlighted on one of those first slides, we could be doing a lot better on, right? We don't provide actual spending numbers until years later, and we don't provide it as part of the budget process. It comes out as what's called the council's annual financial report, which drops in the middle of the year. And it does have usually, I think, starting 2 years back actuals, but they're not released as data. They are just a PDF. So it's very hard to combine them to say, okay, in 2022, we budgeted X, we spent Y, what's X minus Y? Doing that is a much more complicated process than it needs to be. In terms of engagement, This mayor did a fair amount of going out and doing town halls, which is always really good to see. And there was a fair amount of Q&A at those town halls. Lightfoot had done that too. I don't want to just say this was a Brendan Johnson thing. Lightfoot had done some of that too. And it's been progress since the Rahm administration. It's gotten better with every successive mayor in terms of how often they're going into communities and how much time they're given for Q&A in those communities. Those do happen before the budget is presented. So by nature, they're just kind of working with summaries. They're working with pretty big picture. This is about how much we think we're going to spend on this particular broad category. It doesn't give the public the chance to ask the really specific questions that the older people can, where they actually have the budget in hand to say, we are spending this specific number of dollars. It is this many dollars more than we spent last year, asking about that. So something that we would love to see is some of those budget town halls after the budget proposal has been made public, out in the neighborhoods, doing different geographical parts of the city, things like that. We'd love to see that. And just from an accessibility standpoint, we'd love to see the public comment process be made easier. BGA has, instructions on our website on how to do public comment at the city council, because if you've never done it, it is a challenge. Particularly if you're trying to call in, there's a very finicky callback process where you call a number, you leave your name, they'll call you back between a certain number of hours. If you don't pick up your phone, you've lost your chance to do public comment. Those hurdles don't need to be there, right? We're on a Zoom call right now. The technology exists to do this stuff in a really straightforward manner. So definitely some room for improvement on letting folks have their turn at the mic.
Thank you for that answer. Lenny, did you have a follow-up to that or no?
No, thank you so much, Geoffrey. I want to give room for others to ask questions if they would like.
It looks like we have another question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Does BGA have an opinion on funding governmental operations, FAA/City Department of Aviation with user fees?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a huge conflict of interest because it inhibits/prevents regulation on those functions. For example, implementing jet aircraft flight curfews so that people can sleep without being woken up/prevented from sleeping by jet plane noise.
Yeah, I live off of Foster, so I'm on one of the routes. They do come over my house. I know, I'm very familiar. It's a great question. It really is, and it goes broader than Department of Aviation, right? This is a question anytime there's a fee for service or really any kind of revenue stream. How do you prevent it from becoming a perverse incentive, right? Is the government incentivized to provide service, or is it incentivized to protect its revenue stream? And we see that, like you've talked about with the aviation issue. You see that with ticketing. I think that's a huge fees and fines is a huge area where this comes up. The question of, if the city budget relies on X million dollars in fees and fines, is the city incentivized to make sure police are out there writing those tickets rather than doing something else? So this is going to come up in a lot of different categories. And the short answer on does BGA have an opinion is not like a hard and fast black and white, yes, good, no, bad. Like it sounds wishy-washy, but these things do become situational, and not to be too idealistic about it, but the biggest protection we often have is transparency, right? It is making sure that the amount of money they're receiving is published, that the number of actions, fines, fees, whatever they're taking to get that money is public, that older people are asking the department's question and tracking the use over time of these and how they've changed. And it's a lot of work. At the end of the day, it relies on citizen activist groups that care about these things. People who give public comment. You need all of that to sort of serve as guardrails on these, because at the end of the day, the city does need the money to function, right? You don't have a working city without revenue streams. So it's not about saying, well, you shouldn't take any revenue stream that creates, I wouldn't call it conflict of interest. I'd call it has the potential to create perverse incentives. But, you do have to make sure that the city is accountable for what it's doing with that money and how it's getting that money. And the only real way to do that is democratically.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left, and we have 3 questions in the Q&A.
Okay,
so,
short lightning round.
Lightning round, yes. So first question is 2-parter. How is the overall budget distributed to individual wards? Is there discretionary spending for each ward?
Yes, ward offices do get a budget, and they also get their menu money, which is bond funded, it's grant funded for CDOT projects. So I don't have the figures in front of me exactly. Lenny probably knows it better than I, since it's your budget, but it's not massive. They get 3 full-time staff. They get, I think it's about $100,000 budget for ward operations, and then they get the menu money, which is sort of discretionary infrastructure funding. Lenny, do you have more specifics than that, without relying on a spreadsheet? Not to put you on the spot, sorry.
Yeah, I can have Nicole speak on that if she'd like. Who's our budget maven in the ward office?
Everybody. So in terms of the CDOT slash menu money that Geoffrey spoke about, so that's money that we can use for permanent infrastructure projects. And that's $1.5 million per ward. Each ward gets the same amount regardless of the geographical size of the ward. So what we're doing, planning to do here in the 48th is bring participatory budgeting to the ward for the very first time, which means that we're going to put together a big community engagement process and community meetings so that you all can decide how we spend those funds. So that's something really exciting that we've got in the works and are going to get rolling early in 2024. In terms of the staff budget, yeah, the staff, it's 3 full-time staff, as Geoffrey mentioned, per ward office, which is not a lot. And you may have seen that we have more than 3 people currently in the office here, and that the former administration had more than 3 people. So I'll just mention that the former administration had about double the staff budget that we did because Harry Osterman was the chair of a committee, and that came with also 3 staff. So he had 6 full-time staff, we have 3. And then the expense account, which is to pay for rent and things like that, we're using to also fund part-time staff to help kind of bridge that gap. And we are hoping that maybe in this 2023 budget that we might see an increase there so that we can add more staff to better serve the community.
Thanks for the on-the-spot answer, Nicole. She had it ready to go. Okay, we've got, well, a minute, 2 minutes, and we got 2 more questions. Does BGA compare our city budget to other cities' budgets of similar size? What is different in our budget?
Great question. We haven't done like a line item by line item, but we do for big issues that we write about, like when we write about what do we spend on settlements, what do we spend on public relations staffing, things like that. What does our inspector general do, and what powers are different? We do city to city comparisons for things like that. It gets a little hard because not every city breaks out sister agencies and things the same way we do. You know, there's cities that will have their parks or their schools in their municipal budgets. There are cities that will not have their airports in their municipal budgets. So it gets a little apples and oranges. But on specific subsets, we do city by city comparisons.
Okay, and then we have one more question, but I think the last question, the next question might be too long to answer quickly. Where is the fat that should be trimmed back? And the final question is how to reach you with further questions. So that's
I think you're right. I think you're right. Trying to find all the fat that can be trimmed is going to be a slightly bigger answer than we want to dive into tonight. But I will throw my email contact in the bottom there. You can just reach out to me directly. There is a policy@bettergov.org email, but it just bounces to me anyway. So I will just put mine in the chat for you. And please do, I mean it, do feel free to follow up with specific questions about, you know, whatever appropriations or positions really catch your interest. We, several of the older people did that during budget season. They would ask very specific questions like, how many positions do we have over $100,000? Or, you know, how many, you know, what positions changed at the Department of Animal Care and Control, and are any of them going from part-time to full-time? That's great. We love those questions. Those are things that we can answer. It takes a little dive into the spreadsheet, but we're happy to do it. So let me just put that in the chat there, and anyone can grab that for a follow-up who needs to.
fantastic. Well, that concludes our call tonight. Thank you so much, Geoffrey. This was really interesting. There's a lot of thanks for you in the chat and the Q&A, and loving the transparency, and your presentation was really easy to understand. So thanks for breaking it all down for us and coming here tonight to this meeting. We really appreciate it. Anyone who has further questions for Geoffrey can grab his email from the chat. We appreciate you being so available.
Well, great. Thanks so
All right.
much, everyone. And thank you, Alderwoman. Very much appreciate you doing this.
Thank
Thank
you.
And thank you, 48th Ward team. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for those joining on the recording.